When we think about samurai, what comes to mind? When we hear the word shogun, what do we envision? When we imagine warfare in old Japan, what do we see? For many people, the concepts of pre-modern Japanese history are just pictures, a collection of popular ideas that have over the years become meshed into a common belief. Idealistic values, which some strive to uphold during the peaceful Edo period, are intermixed with the iconic battles of the Sengoku era. The popular image of a warrior armored from face to toe and carrying two swords is thrown back into an ancient time when he had not yet come to be. And above all, these samurai are said to be sworn to a strict code of honorable conduct known as Bushido, yet this too is entirely false. In truth, these concepts naturally evolved widely throughout the centuries, as the image of a warrior in one period would never fully fit the description of a warrior from another. Times change, and with them, so do people, culture, technology, and ideas. The Sengoku Jidai, Japan's famous age of warring states, may be the most iconic period in samurai history. But it is just that, a period, a specific time, and even within it, there was much change that occurred. Obviously, this storied age was the main reason I first started this channel years ago. This period is, in my own opinion, one of the greatest tales in world history, a chaotic time of endless war, filled with great heroes and villains, monumental social and political change, and a climactic finish like no other. Yet, as I understood before, as I still do now, the stage must be properly set for such a tale to be told. When I first started this channel, I made it my mission to tell this story in a fresh, coherent, and engaging manner. And although I might have achieved this at the time, we have come a long way since. Which is why I want to return to this first series, to update, refresh, and expand. So, let us venture back once more to dive into these early years, to comprehend the origins of Japan's warrior class and the military governments which would come to rise and fall. Here, we shall seek to understand the coming of the samurai and how they evolved throughout the ages, leading up to their greatest saga. The origins of a unified Japanese state stretch back into ancient times, with the early rise of the Yamato. For hundreds, if not thousands of years, spanning the antiquity of the Jomon and Yayoi periods, the Japanese archipelago was settled by various independent groups, establishing their own distinctive cultures and ways of life, farming the land and constructing significant settlements. It was not until the coming of the Kofun period that we at last see a central government begin to emerge. This was that of the Yamato state, which arose in central Honshu. The Yamato were ruled by heavenly sovereigns who, sometime later by the 7th century, would adopt the term Tenno as their distinction, truly becoming emperors, and at times, empresses. Their own storied lineage, through legend, is said to date back to around the year 660 BC, when the first emperor Jimmu established his rule. Jimmu was believed to have been descended from the sun goddess Amaterasu. Thus, each new emperor or empress of his line carry with them a divine mandate. Over the centuries, Yamato influence became increasingly stronger, as through force of arms, diplomatic pressure, or mutual benefit, surrounding groups began to come under their rule. And although at first glance this might appear as the birth of a powerful kingdom, in truth, it was a bit more of a confederation of powerful governing families who used the Yamato court as a means of cooperation. These powerful families, or great houses, came to be known as uji. Uji have been described as the basic ruling class of early Japan, playing a large role in politics, religious affairs, and military efforts. Yet in these early times, many of them became almost completely autonomous landholders. They eventually came to hold perhaps far more power than that of the emperor, resulting in the Yamato government seemingly being more subservient to them than they were to it. In fact, when the emperor died, they were even said to have played a role in selecting his successor among the other members of the imperial family. Unification efforts continued to work their course over the years, through the Kofun and subsequent Asuka periods, as Yamato influence soon extended west and south throughout Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu. Yamato influence is even said to have been felt perhaps as far away as the southern shores of the Korean peninsula, in an area known as Mimana, yet this is still a matter heavily debated by historians today. Eventually, the growing state, combined with the ever-expanding amount of Uji power, was becoming a significant problem, especially after the uprising and defeat of the Soga family. Thus, by 645 AD, we see the beginning of a process known as the Taika reform. Taika meaning great change. This was an effort championed by Prince Nakano-Oe, later becoming Emperor Tenji, and his political ally Fujiwara no Kamatari. The Taika reform was an effort to strengthen the central government, or rather, an imperial state, by implementing a number of concepts inspired by the governing systems of Tang China. It was a necessary measure to fix what was becoming an increasingly ineffective state, as one of its most important elements was a reining in of the many powerful Uji by nationalizing their land. Through this process, we eventually see landholding elites transition into state-appointed provincial land governors. Now, these reforms were by no means new ideas, and were not put into effect overnight, but were rather a continued effort. In fact, efforts to strengthen and reforge the central government would be continued perhaps more effectively through the introduction of a number of later Ritsuryo codes. Yet, what is also fascinating is that while in the midst of this period of reform inspired by mainland concepts, the Yamato would soon see their connection to the mainland somewhat severed. By this point, the kingdom of Silla was growing ever more powerful in the Korean peninsula, especially after it had annexed the kingdom of Baekje in 660. Yet soon, a restoration movement involving former Baekje elites began to gain traction. Baekje and Yamato had previously held some level of diplomatic contact, and thus when asked for aid, the Yamato complied in hopes of restoring their mainland allies. However, they would soon find themselves facing off against a mighty coalition of Silla and Tang China, who had joined together to put an end to this renewed threat. It is estimated that the Yamato sent a force perhaps as large as 37,000 strong to support the Baekje uprising. Their combined forces would meet that of Silla and the Tang at the Battle of Baekgang, also called Hakusu Kinoe, which would sadly result in a disastrous defeat. Any hope of restoring Baekje would be eradicated, and many of the survivors would even flee over to the safety of the Yamato, who sheltered them. This effectively brought an end to any and all influence the Yamato held within the Korean peninsula, as both Silla and Tang China remained hostile to the Yamato who had aided their enemies. Thus began a growing paranoia that an invasion from the mainland might instead now come to Japan. Such a thought was terrifying, and it may have been one of the reasons why by the close of the 7th century, the Yamato government would implement policies aimed at the formation of a national army. Sometimes called the Ritsuryo Army, this new imperial army was one which was made up of forces of local conscripts throughout all the provinces under Yamato rule. These men were made to give up portions of their time and supply their own equipment while in service to the state. and were to be led by local aristocrats who managed the military functioning of their designated area. Historian Karl Friday goes into further detail on the status of this new military system. All free male subjects between the ages of 20 and 59, other than the nobility and those who suffer from long-term illness or were otherwise unfit for military duty, were liable for induction as soldiers or heishi. He later continues, "A man conscripted as a soldier was joining an organization more akin to a modern National Guard than a standing army. Upon selection, he was immediately assigned to the provincial regiment, Gundan, based nearest his home, and his name was recorded on a special roster made out in duplicate. The amount of time a soldier was required to spend each year on duty in his province is not specified by the Yoro codes, but an imperial edict from 704 ordered that the heishi of each province be divided into 10 watches of 10 days each, and that time on duty be equitably distributed among all troops." It was certainly a thorough system that tried to account for a wide range of factors, yet two detriments remain very clear. It was a force not made up of professional fighters, and it was not always led by particularly skilled commanders. Rather, it was a force of general manpower brought about by the sake of necessity. Fearing an attack from the mainland, a large concentration of where this military buildup was at its heaviest was along the northern and western shores of Kyushu, where it was expected that if an invasion may come, it would come there. However, as the years dragged on into decades, no invasion came, and instead, another threat began to steadily present itself elsewhere. This threat was internal. It was that of the emishi. Although central and southern Japan had come thoroughly under the rule of the Yamato court by the Nara period, the northern portion of Honshu, which takes up much of what we now call the Tohoku region, was not yet subdued. Rather, it remained a free and untamed frontier, held by the tribal Emishi people, who perhaps came of Siberian descent. Encroaching Yamato influence was met with resistance and hostility, as by the late 700s, the Emishi began a campaign of violent raids against Yamato settlements, prompting Yamato expeditions to crush the Emishi. By 774, we see the start of what came to be known as the 38-Year War. The conscript army was truly put to the test here, as the mostly dismounted Yamato forces went toe-to-toe with the largely mounted Emishi horde. In the past, the shortcomings of the Yamato army have been alluded to in great detail, yet this has been misleading. In truth, the Yamato army fared quite well against the Emishi. Yamato archers, operating on foot and behind defensive fortifications such as standing shields, were able to outperform the mounted archers of the Emishi, both in terms of accuracy and rate of fire. In most field engagements, the Yamato army proved successful, resulting in the Emishi having to resort to more hit-and-run and guerrilla-like tactics if they were to ever stand a proper chance. As we noted earlier, the military leaders of the Yamato army were significant figures selected from the nobility, yet they did not always come with proper expertise in leading men, let alone massive campaigns. Yet, towards the end of the war, we do see the emergence of some more competent leading figures who attained an important distinction. Various military leaders throughout the age of the Ritsuryo army had been assigned a range of different grand titles for their role. Yet, the most prominent of them all is not believed to have originated until perhaps 794. This was that of Sei Taishogun, meaning the great general who subdues the barbarians. Today, we widely associate the famed role of Shogun as being derived from this original title. The first figure who is believed to have been granted this title was Otomo no Otomaru, who led the Yamato armies against the Emishi for a time until later being succeeded by Sakanoe no Tamurumaru, who too was made Sei Taishogun after Otomaru. The war itself came to a close by 811, with the Yamato proving dominant throughout Tohoku. Any Emishi who had not fallen under the rule of the Yamato court had instead fled up into Hokkaido to escape. Tamurumaru had, prior to the end of hostilities, already returned to the capital, and later died in the same year the war ended, resulting in a figure by the name of Funya no Watamaru being appointed as technically the final Sei Taishogun of the conflict, as he saw to the continued pacification of the north. Although there would be more leaders who would be granted other positions as significant military commanders in the coming years, Watamoto can likely be viewed as the final Sei Taishogun for many years to come, with the title of Sei Taishogun being one made out of the emergency need for such a position. No further appointment at this time was believed to be necessary, following the end of the war. Still, pacification efforts persisted. Smaller bands of emishi still tried to resist, conducting small-scale raids and avoiding actual confrontation with Yamato armies. However, by this point there had been a significant shift within the Yamato military forces, as the old conscript system had been slowly phased out over the prior decades. In reality, the systems of the Imperial Army had simply run their course in terms of their usefulness to the state. Thus, over the years, the Ritsuryo army was whittled down, ending completely in most provinces by the year 792, as all military focus was more strictly held in the north. In the many other provinces, local conscript forces had become far more of a liability. Certain corrupt officials no longer maintained them as any sort of organized military force, and instead were using conscripts in ways that have been described as akin to slave labor. They were also seen as somewhat ineffective in actually maintaining order. They could not be relied upon to actually carry out tasks such as pursuing criminals or enforcing laws. The central government, recognizing these shortcomings, among others, took proper action to eliminate the system before it became a significant strain on the state. Yet they also did this with the knowledge that there was another proficient military force on the rise, one far more organized and capable. As the conscript system fell away, what rose in its place were groups of professional, private warriors in service to local elites. These warriors had, over time, become a far more effective alternative to the conscript system. Some have equated their role to that of mercenaries, but that term might be too general to describe what these men were. Still, they did band together and sold their service to land governors, who began to use them as proper enforcers over their territory. They more effectively maintained order and collected taxes, while in the north, providing an excellent counter to what little resistance remained from the emishi. This is where we can perhaps start to trace a steady separation within this early society, as an actual warrior class began to emerge, and eventually with it, we will come to see the rise of the term Bushi. Yet the actual full emergence of the Bushi as a distinctive identity and as an official title for professional warriors is a concept which is a bit more complex, and one which we will explore more thoroughly in episodes to come. By the end of the 38-year war against the emishi, we have thoroughly entered into the Heian period, as the old imperial capital which was in Nara was relocated to Heian-kyo. This is what would become our modern-day Kyoto, where the capital would remain for hundreds of years to come. This Heian period is what some consider to be Japan's classical era, a time rife with not only more social change, but also storied events which would go on to shape the future of the country in profound ways. It is in this era in which the warrior class, and specifically warrior clans, would truly come to rise and eventually come to clash in one of Japan's most legendary conflicts by the close of the period. In the next episode, we will continue to explore the origins of this budding warrior culture to the detriment of a slowly weakening imperial state. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most informative.